welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good morning to those on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm Michael Teidigsmann. I'm the Executive Director of EU Watch in Brussels. We're a small NGO. We're created in 2020. The purpose of our organization, of our NGO, is to encourage scrutiny of the European Union and debate. We are focusing on foreign policy, and one of the subjects is how the EU can and should confront authoritarian regimes such as Iran. By doing so, we want to make a small contribution to improving the actions of the EU and also the communications between the decision makers on the one hand and the citizens on the other hand. Now, since the start of the Russian war against Ukraine, the foreign policy of the EU has come under really intense scrutiny and in the spotlight now, perhaps more than ever before. We've seen an expansion of sanctions on Russia, both political and economic. We've seen a huge increase in defense spending and the whole raft of legislations and measures in support of Ukraine. But if you look at other areas, at other countries, at other theaters, you can notice that the EU's actions are not so different from what they were a couple of years ago. And I think Iran is one of those cases. Yes, we've seen sanctions that were adopted in the last 6 months. At the same time, we still see reluctance to go further. And when you look at that subject, there are several big issues where the EU has actually been involved. One is the nuclear file, the JCPOA. Another one is the questions of the 15 EU citizens who are held hostage in Iran. The third, and probably most hotly debated, is the question of the blacklisting of the Revolutionary Guard. So far, the EU has not found or taken the decision to include the IRGC in the list of terrorist organizations. We've run up in the run-up to this event with poll on Twitter, and we didn't expect a big response, but the response was really huge and came overwhelmingly from the Iranian diaspora. We have had more than 7,000 people who have voted in this Twitter poll so far, and the results are very clear. 98% said the IRGC should be listed as a terrorist organization by the EU. So it's very clear what the Iranian diaspora, the Iranian people want. It's an important issue. And the question is, why is the European Union so reluctant to go down that road? And we also want to look today a little bit at what would be the impact of such a decision to blacklist the Revolutionary Guard. The question of, can it be done, legally speaking, from discussions, and will it be effective? And then we want to look at one question, which is, how can the EU actually help those who are detained in Iran arbitrarily or even abducted, taken hostage, condemned to death? What can be done to help the Iranian people overall, the protest movement in Iran? Those are the questions we want to look at today. We have 3 distinguished experts who are going to talk to us today. The first one is Gazelle Sharmahd. She's the daughter of Jamshid Sharmahd, who was kidnapped in Dubai in 2020 by Iranian agents and brought to Iran. 8 weeks ago, he was sentenced to death. And Gazelle has been campaigning worldwide for his release and that of the other hostages that are held in Iran. The second speaker is Kasra Aarabi from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change in London. He's an expert on Iran and on Islamist extremism, and he knows a lot about the Revolutionary Guard as well and its role there. And the third speaker is Matthew Levitt from the Washington Institute in Washington, D.C. He's the director of the counterterrorism program there, and he, in a previous life, I presume, Matt, you served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis at the Treasury Department in Washington. And you've published a lot on this subject as well. So before we start, just a few housekeeping announcements. This is a public event. It's being streamed live on our social media, and it's also being recorded. At the end, we'll give you the possibility to ask, for those of you who are logged into the Zoom, to ask questions to the panelists. For time reasons, I would like to ask you if you could kindly send us your questions in the chat beforehand so we can see to what topic they refer, and also to keep them short and to specify which panelists you want to ask. And then I'll ask you to unmute, sorry, unmute yourself and you can ask the question in person. So that's all I have to say in advance. I'd like to start with Gazelle first. Your father was kidnapped in Dubai whilst on a stopover in 2020. He's been held there in Iran now for almost 1,000 days. Your father is a German citizen. He was never an Iranian citizen, and he lived most of his life in Germany and in the United States. He was tortured, kept in solitary confinement, and recently sentenced to death. A few weeks ago, Gazelle, you went on a kind of a diplomatic offensive in Berlin to ask the German government and the parliamentarians there to help with that case. What were the reactions and the feedback you got from people in Berlin?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me here. I'm not an expert on on anything. I'm just the daughter of a hostage that was kidnapped and taken to Iran, as you have said. And if that makes us experts, that's very, very sad for our world. But apparently it is like that, because my dad's case is not an isolated case. For some reason, before I answer your question about the reaction in Berlin, for some reason in these 44 years that the Islamic regime has been oppressing the people of Iran and torturing and killing them, they have managed to give the image to the world, and especially to Europe, that they will not be a threat to European citizens or the European public in general. And they have maintained that image up until now, even though we have social media and everything to prove otherwise, even though we know that at least 500 opposition figures have been killed in Western countries by the Islamic regime, even though we know of the Mykonos attacks, even though we know that at least 2 European citizens right now have been kidnapped and taken to Iran. It's not just my dad. Although we know that people have been assassinated overseas, we know that agents of the Islamic regime are planning attacks on German politicians. They're planning attacks on German kindergartens, Jewish kindergartens. We know of so many things. We know of their work with Russia. We know that their drones are coming to Europe in Ukraine, and still for some reason, there's the impression that everything will stay over there and will not affect us. I can tell you on my trip that I came to Berlin, I was warned by both of my governments in the US and in Germany that I would not be safe. Traveling to my home country as a German citizen, traveling home would not be safe for me. So we had to arrange for 24-hour security just for me to go to my country and talk to my politicians and ask them what has been done to bring my dad back home, what has been done to save his life. And this alone should give you chills as anybody who's living in the West, that we cannot move, that we cannot talk, that we are not safe outside of the borders of the Islamic regime, because they have become so powerful. And my dad, as I said, is one example. You just mentioned we have at least 15 European hostages held hostage in Iran right now, some of them with death sentences going over 6 years now. Ahmed Reza Jalali, 3 of them at least have death sentences. And these are just the cases that are public right now. So knowing this history and being the daughter of one critic of the regime who worked against them for 16 years and was the voice of the people for 16 years and tried to wake up politicians about what is going on, I can tell you that I don't think what we did was enough. I think we reached the minimum level at which they understood this is happening. People in Europe are not safe. People are kidnapped, taken to Iran, tortured, sentenced to death and nothing has happened. I think we have scratched the surface right now, and people are waking up over there. But what we need is a task force. What we need is a unity between the European countries to work together, because this is not a German problem. This is not a Swedish problem. This is not a French problem. It is a worldwide problem. The Islamic regime has taken hostages from all over the world over 44 years. This is not the first time. It will not be the last time. And the families are suffering, and normal people are suffering. All of the activists that I talked to in Germany are suffering. They're under threat just for going on demonstrations and for coming into webinars like these. They cannot move, they are restricted, and this should not be the case. So what we want from our European governments and our governments worldwide, all of the democratic governments, is to do whatever is necessary to protect us. We don't even ask them, which would be another ask, a normal ask, to protect the people of Iran, which they're not doing for 44 years. But the minimum is, and that is the job of any government, to protect us as their citizens and to show us what is being done when somebody gets kidnapped, tortured, taken over there, and possibly murdered by a terrorist regime.
Mm. You mentioned the European Union. You said a task force cooperation would be good. What has kept them from doing that? And have you been approached by the European Union, by any of the leaders here in Brussels on your case? I imagine you brought it also to their attention long ago. Have you heard anything back?
To the contrary, we as families are not approached usually by politicians. We have to go and seek the attention of the public until we are known, until we can get to somebody, until we are heard. That's why we're doing so much in the public on social media, because we don't have the attention. We don't have the attention of the media, which is, I don't understand, this should be highlights all over the world when European citizens are kidnapped and taken to Iran and about to be murdered. This should concern everybody that this is happening. For some reason, it's not in the main news, and we have to work hard for it with hashtags and social media to make it even know that this is happening. The people that I reached out to and that spoke with me overwhelmingly understand what is going on. Overwhelmingly, we're positive and want to work together with us, which is fantastic. A task force on its own is missing. So what we are doing as hostage families, we the families are coming together, and we the families started contacting our MPs, our European MPs, to make sure that we can, through the families, get a task force that is missing. Because as a victim of a crime, when somebody gets kidnapped in your family by a normal person, by a normal criminal, you know what the ways are. You know, you go to the police, you know there is a task force coming in, there are experts that know how to deal with criminals, there are experts that guide you, there is the press there, and everything is kind of taken care of. But when your loved one is taken by a terrorist regime, and your governments treat this regime not like criminals, they treat them like business partners. They treat them like a sovereign state. They make business with them. They make deals with them. They invite them to our UN human rights commissions to speak about human rights while your loved one is being tortured over there and taken away. This makes it very complicated. So this is one of the reasons why we're not approached, why we're told to keep quiet, to be quiet, because we are a problem in this world in which we are treating terrorists like business partners, and in which we want to continue dealing with them on this level instead of doing the right thing and treating them as criminals as we would treat other criminals. So this is the problem that we were faced with. This is the problem that is still ongoing. And what we are building, this workforce, is not something that we wish for. It is something that is needed. Something that was developed in the US years ago when Levinson was taken, when Foley was taken, and it has been established there. So we wish for a cooperation worldwide, also with the US, to establish a task force that is missing for the hostage cases, and also task forces about how to deal with these criminal regimes all over the world, which we know Islamic regime is not the only one, unfortunately.
Mm. What would you say the European Union should do in such a situation? What is your main demand, apart from that task force you mentioned, but towards Iran, towards the Iranian regime there? What should they do?
again, I have to say, I'm not a politician. I'm not a expert on these. I've spoken to many experts, and I think we will find out right now, speaking to the other experts on this panel, what the best ways and strategies are. And I'm always impressed and listen and take notes when this happens. What I can say as a layperson, as somebody who is a nurse by trade and knows how to save lives, is that I know how to save lives. I know when my patient comes to the hospital, the families don't have to ask me, what do you wish for? What should we do? They can trust that I know what I'm doing. They can trust that I show them the transparency of my strategies. I would show them this and this and this has been approved before. This is what the protocol has been, what we do in these cases. If it doesn't work, this is our other strategy. So transparency is something that I show my patients when I'm saving their lives. And what I wish the European Union and our governments would show us too, what has been done to save lives, what has been done to protect us. And I can tell you, in the 2.5 years that my dad has been taken, next week, next Friday, he's been in solitary confinement, tortured for 1,000 days. I cannot imagine what he is going through, but I can tell you that the result of everything that has been done to help him, to get him out of solitary, to get him to contact us, to save his life from being murdered by a terrorist regime, has been zero, because we still don't know where my father is. We still don't know how he's doing. He still has no contact with us right now. He cannot talk to me. So I cannot tell you exactly what the strategies should be. But whatever has been done right now was either nothing, a lack of action, or it was the wrong action. And what I'm seeing when I'm talking to more and more politicians, I think it has been the wrong action. I think the action has been to wait it out, to be afraid of these regimes, not to unite or to tell us that we don't have enough leverage or power, which even as a layperson, I cannot understand. If one country doesn't have enough leverage and we all have the same problem, then why are we not working together? Why is Sweden not working with Germany? We have both 3 citizens that have death sentences right now in Iran, arbitrarily detained. Why are we not working with our allies in the US? Why are we not working all together? I am sure if we put all of our powers together of the Western countries, that we will have enough leverage over one terrorist state. So I cannot accept what is being told to me. I cannot accept that everything has been done when we see that we have hostages over there that are there for decades, that are missing their children, that are being tortured. So no, enough is not being done. I want transparency. I want a clear strategy. I want the countries to work together. I want them to talk to us and to make this problem, it is not our personal problem, make it a state affair, make it a problem of all of the European countries, and make it a priority to protect us in our countries.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let me move on to Kasra and start with that question that is hanging in the room in a way, or over our heads for a long time, the question of the Revolutionary Guard. You've done a lot of research into that, and I know that many of the hostages that were taken by the Revolutionary Guard, were brought to special courts that are run by that guard. Tell us a bit, Kasra, about the role of that organization inside Iran, and then maybe we can also talk about its role outside of Iran and its threat, the threat that comes from it here in Europe.
Thank you, Michael. Very, very timely session. There's a lot going on in Iran, and although the media attention is not on there at the moment, we're seeing chemical attacks against schoolgirls. We're seeing continued suppression of protesters, and we're also seeing a continued escalation by the IRGC beyond Iran's borders. But the Iran revolution is ongoing. People are still taking to the streets very bravely. So very, very timely session. Now, when we talk about the IRGC, I think it's very important to begin by defining the IRGC, understanding its nature, because ultimately that is key in order to prescribe it. So what is the IRGC? First of all, it's important to underscore the IRGC is not a conventional state military. It operates as an ideological organization. Now, it is constitutionally mandated in the Islamic Republic's constitution with an ideological mission of jihad to spread Sharia across the world. And that's in the constitution, it's still there. So its primary mission is not to protect Iran's territorial borders. Iran has a regular armed force, the Artesh, that does that. The IRGC's primary mission is to enforce the clergy's hardline Islamist ideology on the Iranian people and spread it beyond its borders violently through, as I said, a mission of jihad. So when we say it's an ideological organization, well, what is its ideology? The IRGC's ideology is a violent Islamist extremist ideology. There's no different to the likes of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or Hezbollah, all three prescribed groups across Europe. Now, just like these extremist terrorist organizations, the Guard has a program of indoctrination, a formal program of radicalization. Radicalization now makes up for more than 50% of the IRGC's training. So overall, all the military training, etc., 50% of that now is indoctrination. So what are they teaching their recruits? They are teaching their recruits based off the internal training manuals of the IRGC that I've got hold of, that I've analyzed and published on. They are calling and they are teaching their recruits to wage jihad against Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians on the basis that they have, quote, unacceptable faith, and therefore they must either be executed or must convert to Islam. Not only that, when it comes to Iranians, the Iranian people, Iranians who are opposed to the Islamic Republic, who oppose Khamenei's regime, the IRGC is teaching its members and their families that these individuals are muharibs. They are waging war on God, and therefore they must be tortured prior to their execution. And they prescribe cross amputation, etc. And we're seeing, as we saw the brave Iranian people take to the street, many were detained and executed under the charges of being a muharib. So in terms of ideology, the IRGC is almost identical to the likes of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and identical to that of Hezbollah. It's a Shia Islamist violent organization. It's also worth pointing out that the Quranic verse that is above the IRGC's logo, which is a call to arms, is the most cited Quranic verse used by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So this is a violent Islamist extremist organization. So that's the ideology, but let's look at their modus operandi. Terrorism, hostage taking, hijackings. The IRGC still behaves like a militia. It started off as a militia, and now it's operating as an institutionalized militia. It doesn't behave as a conventional armed force. So we see that inside of Iran, and that's the nature of the IRGC. Now let's look at beyond Iran's borders as well, particularly in Europe. Now look at in the past year alone, last year, MI5, British Intelligence Service, announced that they had foiled 10 IRGC terror and assassination plots in the UK. We've also seen the IRGC's terror operations across Europe. Most recently, we've seen an incident in Greece. We've seen surveillance operations in Germany, in France, etc. But the one area that I really want to touch upon, and people go, well, isn't the IRGC sanctioned? Yes, the IRGC has sanctions on it, but it's not prescribed. Why is terrorist legislation so important? The reason it's important is because the IRGC, as part of its strategy at the moment, has doubled down on its efforts to nurture Islamist, homegrown Islamist radicalization in Europe. It's been pretty open about that. And we've seen the impact of that following the attack on Salman Rushdie. We know that the perpetrator was engaging with violent Islamist, extremist IRGC propaganda and was engaging with IRGC chat rooms. Now, the IRGC is openly stating that it wants to nurture homegrown Islamist terrorism across Europe using the same methods as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Simultaneously, we have seen a rise in IRGC-related propaganda activity, violent Islamist extremist propaganda activity, the dissemination of content, as well as IRGC-related anthems being sung and recorded, specifically designed, by the way, to radicalize European children. For example, Salute Commander, an IRGC production in which children declare their willingness to become martyrs for Khamenei and the 12th Imam. That was recorded in Paris and in London. the IRGC, again, has been very open that its purpose is to recruit and radicalize using these kind of methods. Under the current sanctions regime on the IRGC, these kind of IRGC-related propaganda activities are not prohibited. The prescription of the IRGC, blacklisting the IRGC, provides governments, charity commissions, civil society groups, technology companies with a clear mandate to impose a ban on any content or activity related to the IRGC. That's a mandate that they don't currently have. As well as that, it's important for preventative measures. If you look at preventative measures for preventing violent extremism and radicalization, I'm sure Matt will touch upon this as well. In terms of safeguarding measures, Shia Islamist extremism is a blind spot in Europe and in Britain. The preventative program for preventing violent extremism and preventing radicalization in the UK doesn't cover Shia Islamist extremism. Ditto Germany, ditto European Union. It is almost exclusively focused on Salafi jihadism. Prescribing the IRGC. Sure.
Excuse me if I interrupt you. Why is that? Why would you say, after all the terrorist attacks we had in the last 10 years in Europe, why are they turning a blind eye on that?
Because they're not recognizing it as a Islamist extremist ideology. So Shia Islamist extremism is not recognized. When we talk about Islamist extremism, over the past 20 years, the focal point has almost exclusively been on Salafi jihadism, so Sunni Islamist extremism, the likes of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. So Shia Islamist extremism is a complete blind spot. Prescription would change that. Prescribing the IRGC as a terrorist organization would again equip governments in Britain, in Europe, in Germany, and individual member states, by the way, can do this. The European Union can do it as a bloc. But at the moment, they're not equipped to prevent radicalization in relation to IRGC related or Shia Islamist extremist related activity. Prescription would provide that safeguarding measure. And that's why it's important. So those that say, oh, the IRGC sanctioned and this would have no impact, it's just symbolic, that's completely false. This would have practical implication. It will have practical use, practical consequences for the IRGC. And it's most important because European citizens, in particular, by the way, the Jewish community and the Iranian community, the Iranian diaspora, they are the primary targets. They are directly under threat here. This is a matter of European national security, and it should be treated as such. So prescription is not just symbolic, it would have practical implication and effects.
Thanks. Maybe I bring in Matthew here. You've written a very interesting article recently on the legal argument. Josep Borrell, the EU Foreign Affairs High Representative, said I think it was in January and February, we cannot blacklist the IRGC because for that we need an EU court ruling. Matt, what is your response to that? Do we need further proof?
So first of all, I want to thank you, EU-Watch, for convening this discussion, and it's a pleasure to be able to participate here with Gazelle and Kasra. I want to take a quick second just to say to Gazelle that you may not consider yourself to be an expert, but for you, unlike the rest of us, this is not an academic issue. And that gives you unique standing. And I just want to say how much solidarity and I know everyone else has with the pain that you and your family are going through. I'm going to answer your question, Michael, but first I have to just jump in on the issue of kind of what the IRGC is doing, because largely because of where Gazelle opened up with the fact that most people aren't aware of all of this activity. A few years ago, after having one too many conversations like that with officials, I brought together my team and I said, I want to put together an open source, unclassified data set of Iranian external operations, assassination plots, whether they succeeded or not, abduction plots, surveillance plots, I've served in the US intelligence community. We're not drawing on any of that. I've terminated all of my clearances. Let's just see what is available in the open source. Now you got to dig. It's not just a matter of sitting there and Googling on your computer. But I can tell you, because I've been in the US intelligence community, that we're nowhere near the full amount of what is out there. But from an open source project so far, we have compiled data on 166 Iranian plots over 44 years. Of those, 74 are in Europe. And I have to tell you, there are several things that I was surprised about going into this. The first was that I anticipated that we'd see the majority of Iranian external operation plots take place in places in the third world where there's lax border security and insufficiently capable law enforcement and intelligence services, and we see those things. But I was shocked to see that when we graphed out the biggest significant number of attacks was in Europe, followed by United States and Canada, North America. And then the second thing that surprised me was just how consistent over time Iran, primarily through the IRGC, but there are other entities involved, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, a particular department within the Foreign Ministry, others that cooperate on this, maybe a little more friction over the past few years, including with the creation of the IRGC's own intelligence organization. But for the purpose of carrying out these attacks, they still cooperate. How consistently they did these, even at times that were sensitive and in places that were sensitive. So I would have anticipated, for example, that as Iran was negotiating the Iran deal the first time around, the JCPOA 1.0, they might have pulled back a little bit because it was a sensitive time. When they were trying to promote the European Union's idea of having Instex, a financial mechanism that would facilitate JCPOA allowed payments and business with Iran, even after the Trump administration withdrew, they would pull back a little bit because the Europeans were doing something they liked. Or that when they were trying to, were efforts to resume a JCPOA 2.0, they might pull back. And none of that was true. Plots throughout that period. The only time we found a significant drawback was in the months after 9/11, where Iran, and for that matter, Hezbollah, did not want to be caught up in the crosshairs of what we were then calling the war on terrorism, which suggests that there are things and are circumstances in which they can be deterred from this type of activity, but it's not the type of things we've been doing. I think it's incredibly important to understand, for example, Gazelle, your father was grabbed in 2020, I believe, in the UAE. The following year, an individual named Ali Reza Farhani was outed in a US government indictment for his role in overseeing abduction plots around the world. In particular, this was in the context of the plot to abduct Masih Alinejad from Brooklyn. But when the US Department of Justice revealed that, they also revealed that Farhani, at the very same time, was overseeing similar abduction plots targeting Iranians that the regime doesn't like in the UAE, in Canada, and in the United Kingdom. So the scale and the scope of this, while it has been consistent over time, has picked up pace in a very significant way. And that provides the context for this European discussion when the Iranians plot a really serious bombing of an MEK rally outside of Paris, where all kinds of people are going to be killed. This was not an assassination to kill one person. I'm not saying that's okay, but even worse is to do something indiscriminate that who the hell knows how many people are going to be killed. And they do this in France with a diplomat based in Vienna and dual nationals based in Brussels. The Autobahn is shut down in a James Bond style takedown to arrest this individual, who the Iranians are now trying to get released. And how are they doing that? By abducting Belgian citizens. This really got people's attention. The Masih Alinejad plots, first to abduct her and then to assassinate her here in the United States, are just one example of the way they've been doing things here in the United States as well. And so that's what prompted the European Union to finally even consider this issue. I was very, very upset, Michael, to now finally answer your question. Thank you for your patience. When Joseph Borrell said, look, we need a European court decision in order to do this, because that is absolutely not what CP 931, Common Position 931, which is the European Union's legal basis for designation, says. There have been lots of studies about it. And so I wrote a fairly detailed piece getting into the weeds of just how wrong he was. And I've spoken to many European Union officials and experts, and they all agree that his statement was a political statement and not a very good one at that. In fact, European courts have determined not only does there not need to be a court decision, a court could just make a statement. In fact, it doesn't even need to be a court. It can be an other competent authority, and it doesn't even need to be European. It can be a foreign. And I went through just some of the examples in Belgian courts, in German courts, in British courts, in American courts, of the details that have come out to this effect. At the end of the day, this is a political policy decision, one that comes down to whether or not the Iranians will be so upset by this, which is what they've said they would be, that they would simply stop all diplomatic talk with the European Union. To believe that presumes that the European Union needs Iran more than Iran needs the European Union. There is the nuclear file, which is not the primary topic here, but is the primary reason why European Union and other officials are very, very concerned about losing that diplomatic contact with Iran. But I think that this is a bluff worth calling. The Iranians need Europe and the West for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that their perception of self is that they are not a rogue regime. And they feel very, very strongly about not being presented as a pariah at a time when there is such internal dissent against the regime. The regime is especially sensitive to this. And so you may ask me why at this particularly sensitive time are the Iranians going about all these operations around the world. I mean, think about Masih Alinejad. She's wonderful, but a woman with frizzy hair and a big flower in her hair who, this is who they're petrified of? And the answer is yes. And the reason is because the more the regime is surrounded by people who come from the orbit of the IRGC and see the world through IRGC tinted glasses, they are going to look at the world, as Kasra explained, through the lens of protecting the revolution, not Iran, the revolution. Kasra was head on when he explained that the IRGC is not the Artesh. Their job is not to defend the borders of Iran. Their job was, is, and always will be to defend the revolution and the revolutionary leadership. To the extent they feel under threat because of domestic protests, because of pushback over their miscalculation to provide weapons to Russia in the context of Ukraine, because maybe they didn't think that we would call them out and put out so much public information, the poor Safi indictment here in the United States about their plot to target Ambassador Bolton. All of this makes them feel more vulnerable. And they therefore, from their perspective, which I don't share, but it's important to see it, how they see it, it's even more important to target people who are looking to undermine their standing because otherwise it will threaten the regime. They become more, not less worried about Gazelle's father, about Masih Alinejad. And we therefore need to be even more prepared to lay out the line. And if the line can't be assassinating and abducting our citizens is not okay, then I don't know what the line is. The only second argument people make is, just to briefly, that really the designation won't provide any new authorities. Kasra laid out some really good arguments to the contrary. I agree, but it's not just a question of what the actual authorities would be that would be new. I think it's at least important that we would be signaling to them, we will not tolerate the assassination and abduction and conviction and sentencing to death of our citizens. Full stop. That does not seem to me to be a big ask.
Now, you in the US, you have them on the terror list since, I believe, 2018. What has been the impact of that? Has there been a difference in terms of the law enforcement of activities on US soil by the Revolutionary Guard?
So it's a really interesting question with a complicated answer. The US already had significant authorities, and there really is no one that is more aggressive on this from a law enforcement and Treasury designation perspective than the United States, I'm proud to say. I actually, therefore, at the time, wrote an article saying that it's not actually necessary to designate the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization, since we have already designated the IRGC under 3 different authorities, including a different counterterrorism authority. But then once it was done, and there was discussion under the Biden administration about whether to undo it, I wrote an article saying, look, I said it wasn't necessary, but now that it's done, it'd be a very, very bad idea to undo it. And I'm happy to explain all the technical issues, but they're really technical, so I'll spare you unless you ask for it. I think it is important to note that the US has also started to be an important convening authority, not exactly for the task force, Gazelle, that you want, but for something similar. For years, the US has been convening international authorities and through something called the Law Enforcement Coordination Group, the LECG, which focuses on international efforts to deal with Lebanese Hezbollah. Recently, the US convened the first of what they call the CTTF, the Countering Transnational Terrorism Forum, which despite its vanilla name is all about countering IRGC activity around the world. And the first meeting of that happened in Budapest just a few weeks ago. It's a really effective way to get the law enforcement, the treasury, the regulatory, and even the foreign ministry people who tend to be the ones who are saying into the same room to say, what are they doing in your country? What are you doing about it? What worked for you? What was a problem, to share experiences? And that is extremely effective.
Thanks a lot. Kasra, you already talked a little bit about the potential benefits of listing the IRGC by the European Union. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit what exactly could be done that cannot be done under existing European sanctions against them? What would improve, and what would be potentially the pitfalls of such a move? Some people argue, for example, that it could not stand in a European court, and if they were kind of, if the sanctions were lifted on the guard, EU would look really bad. So, can you understand that argument that is being heard here in Brussels? We want to be absolutely sure that if we go down that road, that it will stand up in court.
Well, I think as Matt just explained, that there doesn't need to be, the whole court ruling, I think is not entirely accurate. The thing to go back to as well, and look, member states individually can prescribe an entity, or the European Union can do it collectively. In the UK, for example, or in Germany, Hezbollah is already listed, the entirety of Hezbollah. Now, the argument is that those who oppose listing the IRGC state, it's an entity of the state, say it's a state part of the Iranian state. Well, Hezbollah is also part of the Lebanese state, in theory, but it is also a violent Islamist extremist terrorist organization. So in the UK, and for example in Germany, where you have Hezbollah prescribed in its entirety, if Hezbollah is on the list, there is no reason why the IRGC shouldn't be on the list. The IRGC created Hezbollah. The IRGC wrote the Hezbollah charter. Hossein Dehqan, who was so-called reformist President Hassan Rouhani's defense minister, he wrote Hezbollah's charter that called for the eradication, of State of Israel. The IRGC is the biggest ideological, military, financial supporter of Hezbollah. So all those efforts, by the way, to prescribe, to curb Hezbollah's access to funds, to prevent the spread of its jihadi propaganda, all of those efforts are undermined when its father, the IRGC, its main source, is able to run free and is not treated in the same way in terms of prescription. So, in terms of, as I said, what it would do, it would give governments a mandate to impose a ban outright on any activity related or any content related to the IRGC, so treating them no different to the likes of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And that's really important because there are a number of organizations, by the way, that are IRGC affiliated that are freely operating in Europe. We have the Al-Mustafa University. The Al-Mustafa University was sanctioned by the US for its role in the recruitment and radicalization of its students for the purposes of being deployed in IRGC militias. Al-Mustafa has openly said, the chairman of Al-Mustafa has openly said that it has ties, it frequently has speaks to Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, it has ties to the IRGC, and it has boasted that it has played a role in recruiting and radicalizing for its militants. We have an Al-Mustafa branch in London. We have an al-Mustafa branch in Berlin. We have an al-Mustafa affiliate in Italy. All of these organizations are directly tied to the IRGC, and the Guard has a history, by the way, of using cultural organizations globally for its terrorist operations. Again, this is not just a case of it being symbolic. The Revolutionary Guard presents a direct national security threat to European states. As Gazelle said, look, just for the second, let's forget Iran, because the European Union hasn't, and the West hasn't stood up for the people of Iran, even though it clearly should. But even for the protection of its own citizens, it's not taking the effective measures. The Iranian diaspora community, and as a member of the Iranian diaspora community who's vocal on this issue, as well as working on this professionally, it's feeling tense in Europe. Similarly, I've spoken to the Jewish community here, again, the direct targets, the Iranian diaspora, and they also rightly feel threatened. Prescription of the IRGC is really important. As I said, it has practical implications, and it would give government authority to prohibit IRGC activity, particularly going back to that propaganda activity and that propaganda movement. It would give them a mandate, something that they currently don't have, something that current sanctions do not equip government to deal with. So practically speaking, it has major implications, and it will be hugely significant in protecting European citizens. So it's a step that has to be taken, and it seems to me that I've not seen any convincing arguments yet to suggest otherwise. And I'm happy, by the way, to touch on the conscription issue as well, because again, that is something that we've recently published on with Professor Saeed Golkar, and it's something that, again, it's an excuse. It can be easily overcome.
Do you feel let down by European politicians, especially those in government, as a member of the Iranian diaspora?
I know that the people of Iran certainly feel let down. Look, right under our nose, we have, the Iranian people, they are openly the slogan of this revolution, women, life, freedom. We have seen unprecedented secularization in Iranian society, unprecedented liberalization in Iranian society. They share the same values that we uphold in Europe. They are calling for our support, and there are many mechanisms, by the way, at the European government's disposal that they can take. Yes, it requires political will, but there are many mechanisms there. For example, closing down the direct ideological organizations that are directly linked to Ayatollah Khamenei, namely the Al-Mustafa University centers. They're cultural centers that are propagating violence, by the way. They're propagating hatred towards the Iranian protesters and people who support them. They're centers. That's one of the measures the Europeans can take. Close down these centers. Secondly, the Islamic Republic operates, it is a kleptocratic or oligarchic system, right? So even though the IRGC's commanders, the clergy, violently enforce a hardline Islamist extremist order on the Iranian people and are killing women for showing a bit of hair, their sons, their daughters, the Aghazades, as we call them in Farsi, the noble-born, live lavish lifestyles in Western capitals, in Paris, in Berlin, in London, and in some of the very fancy parts of London, by the way, Mayfair, Knightsbridge, and also in Canada. Now, just as we have in Europe targeted Putin's oligarchs with Magnitsky sanctions, one of the levers the Europeans have is using Magnitsky sanctions against the oligarchs of the regime who live abroad, freeze their bank accounts, impose travel bans, take their passports away. And then finally, it's the issue of the prescription of the Revolutionary Guard. These are three policy steps that, if the West were to take, that would be very well received by the Iranian people, who, by the way, are bravely risking absolutely everything, taking to the streets to fight against this oppressive regime that is not only a threat to Iran, not only is it a threat to the Middle East, it is a threat to the world. In particular, now we see in Europe, as President Zelensky said, we're seeing Iranian drones now being fired inside Europe, targeting European citizens. Still, we've not seen any real action. Yes, we've seen small targeted sanctions, but in terms of effectiveness, the Islamic Republic doesn't feel as though, so far the Islamic Republic feels as though it's not faced any consequences for its actions, and that's emboldened it.
Speaking of risks, maybe I give the floor again to Gazelle. There's one question from Yossi. Maybe Yossi, if it's okay, I read it very short. Question to Gazelle. How do you react to this exchange of a Belgian hostage against an Iranian diplomat who was sentenced here to prison in Belgium for terrorism offenses? How would you react? And also, what is your of your father and all the others inside Iran?
You broke off in the middle of it, but I think the question was about
the question was the risks that if the European line is tougher on the regime, do you not fear that it would mean could mean bad news for your father and for all the other people imprisoned in Iran?
Yeah, and that's a very difficult question to answer, because every family whose loved one has been taken is hoping for some way to get them back. Not just the European hostages, also the people, the hundreds, thousands of people in Iran whose family members have been taken hostage, pretty much kidnapped out of their lives. And they don't have foreign citizenship, and they don't have the media or a stage where they can talk about it, but that's happening in Iran as well. And I believe, so this is my personal belief, there is nothing that is higher than human life, the value of human life and human dignity. Not $1 million, not any kinds of deals. It is always there's nothing we should not do to save human lives. That let me say that first. When a life has been taken, I wish I could buy free all of the hundreds of people right now who are in jail with a death sentence, the innocent people, and I could buy them free. I would do that. But here's the thing. If we deal with these terror regimes the way they want to, they arbitrarily take somebody hostage to get their own terrorists out. They take people hostage to get a better business deal. They take people hostage to put pressure on our governments to act in a certain way. Then we are showing them that they can do with us whatever they want. So if there are other ways of dealing with these people, and I understand if your people are taken hostage, again, let's take it out of the political sphere and put it in a non-political sphere. Your family members has been in a supermarket and hostage takers have taken them. Yes, a team would come and try to get these people out. Maybe it costs them a helicopter and $1 million. That is okay to save people's life. But the moment they get them out, you would not invite these kidnappers into your business deal. You would not invite them into your committees. You would not invite them to your country. You would not shake their hands. You would make sure that these people who are criminals are responsible for what they're doing, and they're taken accountability, and they're treated like criminals, and they're taken to court, and they will be prevented from ever doing that again. So 44 years ago, when the Islamic regime took their first hostages, they took the US embassy hostage. They were freed, and everybody was looking at it, and everybody was aware of the hostage crisis, and everybody and every country took it serious, and the hostage came out. But what happened afterwards? We forgot that this ever happened. We treated this regime like a business partner, like a legitimate sovereign state that you can talk to. And that was our mistake. So I'm not saying that a deal to get a hostage out is necessarily the worst thing in the world. I know, for example, Nazanin Zaghami Radcliffe, who was in Iran for 6 years, who didn't see her daughter for 6 years. When she came out, millions of pounds were released to the Islamic regime, which is horrible, but we saved one person's life. But my question is, why should we let this regime tell us what to do? If we want to make deals with them, okay, let's, for example, say this terrorist Asadullah Assadi that you're talking about, that is right now, that tried to kill people in Paris, a diplomat, carrying a bomb to Paris. If they want him back, which they want, they have told us in my dad's case several times, they make my dad look like a terrorist to make his price higher to be able to exchange with these people. If they want to do any kinds of deals, first of all, it's always better if it's some criminal instead of billions of dollars that this regime uses. Second of all, why don't we take the upper hand? Why don't we say, okay, you want your criminal back, but in exchange, we want you to stop gassing the people in the schoolgirls in Iran and poisoning them with gas. Why don't we say, okay, you want this one person back. In exchange, we want our 15 official European hostages back. Why don't we change it around and make it a deal instead of being pressured by the regime to where they just take one hostage, one person, and exchange them for another one? This is not a good deal. This is showing the regime that they have the pressure. And lastly, but not least, if we have other measures to put pressure on this regime instead of doing what they want, why don't we use that? If we have leverage, for example, Germany is still the biggest trade partner of the Islamic regime. Why do we have to do what the regime is saying when we can use our leverage, when we can use our money, when we can tell our companies that are still making millions of dollars in Iran, which we, the German country, does not depend on these millions of dollars, the Islamic regime does. Why don't we threaten to take out our business out of there until our hostages are released, until people don't get death sentences, until they stop killing the people in the street? We can use this, we can put pressure. And that would answer your next questions. Do I think that pressure on the regime would endanger the hostages, would endanger my dad? Of course, everything that we do endangers them. But what is the alternative? Is the alternative to continue pleasing terrorists, to continue working with them and letting them kill their own people, terrorize us over here and get what they want? Will that not endanger many, many more people? After my dad was taken hostage and kidnapped, so many more people that I talked to had the same fate and escaped it. It was just said, 166 plots, I think, were mentioned that you can just like find out on the internet without having any intel. These are just plots that are out there. My dad, when he was supposed to be killed in Los Angeles, when they sent an assassin to Los Angeles, he wasn't supposed to be killed like Masih Alinejad. He wasn't supposed to be gunned down by a gunman. He was supposed to be run over by a truck. So it would have looked like an accident. So you can imagine how many people have been killed by accidents that were actually assassination plots by the regime. So many people that were tried to be killed and weren't killed. So to make this whole question easy, no, I don't think we should deal with terrorists. I think what we've done, all of these dealings, has put us into this situation where they easily kidnap our citizens, take them over there, and there is no response. There is nothing in response. Habib Chab is a Swedish citizen who was kidnapped from Turkey after my dad was kidnapped from Dubai. Taken there, he has gotten the death sentence, and the most that the Swedish government did was condemn it and summon their ambassador. What the German government did when my dad got the death sentence and was kidnapped, when he was kidnapped, they did nothing. They didn't even talk about it, and not a red line for them. When he got the death sentence, they threw out 2 of their diplomats. But do you know what the Islamic regime did when these 2 diplomats were kicked out? First of all, they kicked out 2 German diplomats. Second of all, they announced that they will take the whole German embassy hostage. They said that the Germans are providing a state to terrorists. They put a new accusations on my dad, list of propaganda accusations, and said that he is now not only a spy of the CIA and Mossad and you name it, he is now also a spy of Germany. So what I'm trying to say is, when we show weakness to these terrorist regimes, they lash back. They are not impressed by weakness. They are impressed by strength. We have to stop thinking of them as politicians that would make rational choices. We have to understand that these are psychopaths, And we have to treat them as such. And psychopath, you need psychologists to tell you how to treat them. The way you treat them is not to give them what they want. The way you treat them is to make sure that they cannot threaten other people, that they are taken out. And that's why we need to put these pressures on there to prevent other people. What was just said is, for example, that when Masih Alinejad was almost kidnapped and assassinated, that brought media attention. For a month or so, people of the world woke up. Oh, people are not safe in New York. My dad was not safe in LA. We are not safe in Europe. But if we don't save the hostages in Iran, if we don't show that this is a priority for us, what we're doing is putting a target on every person, on every European that is outside right now, every European that is speaking up against the regime, or being a journalist, or being a politician. Because if we don't show that civilians are not okay to be taken hostage, they will expand it. They will now target politicians. They will now target mono-citizens. And they are doing that right now. More and more threats are coming up. And we have to work together. We have to put pressure on them. Otherwise, we cannot stop them.
Thank you. I've got a few questions in the chat. I have one myself still, maybe to Matthew, if you want. What can the European governments actually do to help the people inside Iran, the people who are rising up now, other than prescribing the IRGC and that sort of action? But what can be done inside Iran? Should anything be done inside Iran? Some people are saying we should stay out of this. This is a matter for the Iranian people to resolve, just as we should stay out of other conflicts. What would you say to the governments, to the political leaders here, that should be done?
Look, this is something that needs to be addressed a little bit carefully. If there's too much of a Western bear hug here, it provides propaganda platforms for the regime to say that this is not an Iranian, grassroots movement. This is something that is, a Western conspiracy. But there's lots that can be done quietly, and I do think that publicly we should be talking about this all the time. I don't think that a U.S. presidential statement, for example, is the be-all and end-all, but I think that the Iranians hear very clearly when there's no presidential statement. I'd like this to be something, and it has been something that U.S. officials have talked about. I'd like it to be something they talk about more. I'd like to see a presidential statement about this. But then the things that we really need to do are done quietly. There are ways that we can provide and have been providing technology so that people can evade the government's ability to crack down on access to the internet or get into people's phones. But there's a limit to what we can do unless we decide to put costs on the regime related to this issue also. And it's not that I'm against that. It's just we need to figure out what and how are we prioritizing. Because if we say that we're stopping business or we're designating things because of a very, very, very long list, a laundry list of activities, we're not likely to get change in behavior on any of them. We need to kind of focus on a few at a time. I do want to jump right back for 1 second to the question of the benefits to designating the IRGC. So I mentioned earlier there are some kind of macro benefits to kind of puncturing their sense of self. The simple, and I don't mean to be particularly pithy here, but the simple answer to why do they engage in these types of activities is, well, because they can, and because the cost, both financial and otherwise, is so low. And I think it's not the financial cost, but the otherwise that we need to address more. I think Kasra's point about global Magnitsky type sanctions, diplomatic sanction are important. The U.S. State Department has a particular visa waiver authority. I think we should be denying visas to every Iranian who's an immediate family member of someone who we can demonstrate is involved in this whole range of activities. And I guarantee you those households will be loud and angry when their sons and daughters and wives can't go to university and shopping in LA, New York, Paris, Berlin, what have you. We don't do those types of things. But I do think it's important to note that a designation of the IRGC by the European Union would also have some very tangible effects. We should not ignore that. An EU designation would make it a criminal offense to belong to the IRGC. to support the group in any way, to attend its meetings, to display its logo in public. None of that is prescribed right now. Beyond criminalizing these activities, an EU designation would subject the IRGC to what the EU describes as enhanced measures relating to police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters. That's an EU term that goes along with Common Position 931. It would enhance cooperation, perhaps to the level of the kind of task force that Gazelle was talking about. And it would make funds that the group maintains in Europe subject to an asset freeze. So right now, for example, when the IRGC raises money or launders money through Europe, European authorities can address that if it's expressly criminal in nature. Now, if you are raising money through legitimate means, if you are taking money that you earned by being a professional, it's not the proceeds of illicit conduct, you can still address that. It would become illicit and criminal by virtue of being intended for this designated entity, the IRGC. And finally,
yeah, sorry to interrupt. You answered Anna's question here, which I just read. What instruments can be implemented to limit money laundering by the IRGC in the EU?
Yeah,
Maybe,
I mean, this is it. This is it. I mean, it's already the case that money laundering, when it's found as money laundering, is addressed. There's also questions in here about Lebanese Hezbollah. And as a former official, without getting into things I can't talk about, there were times when we would reach out to our European counterparts on Hezbollah issues and not get tremendous response. But if we also then responded by saying, hey, drop the word Hezbollah, it's the same group of people, we just noticed that they're moving drugs or engaging in money laundering in Europe, then the law enforcement authorities were very, very interested, whether it was Hezbollah or not. So when it's clear money laundering and money laundering authorities, counter illicit finance authorities can see that, they'll address that, whether it's IRGC or just some criminals. But often you don't see it that way. And this would provide those additional authorities that would make it much easier to address these things. Europol released one of its annual counterterrorism reports a couple of years ago. And in the context of Hezbollah, not Iran, but it applies equally, said, look, the fact that Hezbollah is not entirely designated here really complicates our ability to prosecute these activities. The same absolutely true for the IRGC. But again, I think it's critical to understand that the IRGC does what it does because it can. There are no consequences. So let's start putting in place some costs. And one of them would be to do this, which would have some real effects under EU law, under European Union regulations, but it would also kind of be a very powerful, ironically, because it's otherwise not the biggest action in the world, but a very powerful message to the Iranians, like, no, seriously, we know that you know that we know what we know, and we're not going to pretend we don't know it, and it's not okay.
Thank you very much. I have one question here from who is it? It says iPhone 8 on the JCPOA question. Maybe I'll read it quickly. JCPOA is what many Western countries put their trust on for limiting the IRGC from developing the nuclear weapon. But this regime is many bodies in one, and there is no guarantee, even if one government signs an agreement, it will hinder the other more radical branches of IRGC to move on and develop that nuclear weapon. Why does this not concern the free world? And it's the question, why are they making the same mistake as with Putin? Is that the elephant in the room, that threat of having to deal with a nuclear Iranian weapon down the road, or is it a separate issue?
Okay. It's lots of pieces to this question, most of which we don't have time to answer. But I will just say this. The unanimous concern about Iran becoming a nuclear capable state, which is a threshold below having a nuclear weapon that can be deployed tomorrow, is something that hangs over all the rest of these other things. So much so that when the JCPOA was negotiated, it didn't include any of these things we've been talking about, because the idea was, whether you agree with it or not, that to include all of these things would have been to get nowhere. It's the issue, the concern about not being able to have direct contact with the Iranians over the nuclear issue that prevents many European countries from wanting to take action like designating the IRGC. The Iranians understand this and they say, listen, you designate the IRGC, we won't, which is a part of our government, you designate a part of our government, we won't talk to any of you. I don't believe it. I call bluff. But I understand why European countries are concerned about it. And I think this is something that they need to be approached on, the European countries, to make them understand. In the United States, we've had our very strong position on Iran for a long time. It hasn't stopped us from being able to negotiate directly and indirectly with Iran over these and other issues as appropriate. But it is the case that the biggest elephant in the room is the Iran nuclear program, and it kind of shades everything else. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise that when some of these issues aren't going so well, what does Iran do? They start enriching a little bit more. They do other things. They move the lines on the nuclear program because that, they know, is what we are most concerned about. Not to suggest that we're in any way unconcerned about all the things we've been talking about today. I think it's pretty clear we are. But a nuclear-powered Iran would be a very, very different, infinitely more complicated problem set.
Okay. Now, we've done over 1 hour now already. I would maybe do one final round, and if anybody has a question, maybe they should raise their hands now. We can have maybe 1 or 2 short, brief questions if there are any. If not, I would like to put a final round of the 3 speakers to you, all of you, one question. If you had 5 minutes in the room with Josep Borrell and 27 EU foreign ministers on that subject, what would you tell them? Really briefly, what would be the main thing you would ask them to do on this matter? Maybe Kasra, you go first.
15 minutes or 5 minutes with Borrell?
5.
5 minutes of
Now
Borrell. Wow, where do I start? I think, well, to take a step, you got to take a step back. And first of all, let's look at what we've got. We don't have a plan B. I think the European Union has been quite clear that it doesn't have a plan B, and its plan A is the JCPOA, which quite frankly is dead. You have a situation, first of all, when you look at Iran, you have to approach it holistically. All these issues are connected. And the Islamic Republic, as I said, is a threat not only to the Iranian people, not only to the Middle East, not only to Europe, but the entire world. And many of the problems of the world, terrorism, destabilization, the regime support for Putin's war in Ukraine, would be resolved if the Islamic Republic were not to be there. So what the Europeans need to do, in my opinion, is come together with the Americans. We need a united transatlantic policy that draws a distinction between the Iranian people and the Islamic Republic. If the Islamic Republic were to collapse, it would be the single most liberating thing for Iran, the Middle East, and the world. There is a unique opportunity here. The Iranian people are risking absolutely everything. Let's look at the long term. The Europeans, the West more broadly, have always been looking at the short term to delay the problem. That was the JCPOA. The JCPOA didn't resolve the issue. It delayed, kicked the can down the road. We need a long-term strategy for the Islamic Republic and for the Iranian people. That starts by coming together. That starts by making sure that the Iranian people have the support they need. The trend of unrest in Iran has grown. The pattern of unrest shows that this trajectory is going to continue. Protests are growing in size, scale, and the regime is having to turn to more violence to uphold the system. So look, what I would say again is a united transatlantic policy. We need policies to weaken the Islamic Republic and its suppressive machine. So that's prescription in the IRGC, hit them where it hurts, go after their money, freeze their assets in Europe. And we need a policy that supports the Iranian people and their aspirations. And whether that's providing technology to keep them online, whether that's to provide a strike fund for Iranian workers, there are multiple options, but it starts with saying, look, it's not going right now. We need to take a step back. We need to have a plan B, and the plan B needs to be transatlantic, and it needs to draw a clear distinction between the regime and the people. That's what the Iranian people are saying.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Matt, would you also have your 1 minute audience and make it a bit shorter now with Josep Borrell and the foreign ministers of the EU?
So maybe counterintuitively, because I've talked about some things I tell Joseph Borrell that I've kind of talked about already in terms of how he was wrong on what CP 931 does and does not say. That's not what I would talk to him about, because I don't think he actually misunderstands it. I think he just was saying what he felt he wanted people to hear. Instead, I'd spend the time explaining to him the ways in which designating the IRGC would not undermine EU interests. I don't think he needs to be convinced. He has plenty of people working for him who agree with me on this, that the IRGC warrants designation. I don't need to waste my time explaining all the horrible things they've done that we've talked about today. I would focus my time on why doing what should be done wouldn't undermine other EU interests, which is actually, I think, the number one issue standing here. And I think that would be a fun conversation. I've had it with people below him, never with him.
Thanks. Gazelle, you'll have the final word with Mr. Borrell and 27.
I just wanted to say one more thing about the question before. I forgot to mention that about the prisoner exchange in Belgium. Besides everything that I said, the law that is in place, that Belgium decided to make a law, this is the biggest issue there, that we have a legal way of exchanging criminals with the Islamic regime that will open up the way for them to commit more terror attacks in Europe on European citizens, and all they have to do is take the next Belgian citizen hostage and get their criminals back. That's the worst that can happen. So the law is the biggest problem that I forgot to talk about. That must be taken down, and we need the whole diaspora. We need everybody in Europe to attack that and be vocal about that. About Mr. Borrell, the only thing I would have to say to him is about his last outburst that I saw on social media, where he did not want to answer the question of a journalist and said, "I'm not going to answer that. The interview is over." I want to remind him and our world, journalists are our way of questioning our politicians. Mr. Borrell did not answer to my letters about my dad. He did not answer to any of our letters about the European hostages. So European or worldwide journalists are there to ask these questions and to get the answers from our politicians that we gave the power to be in their position, not to get high wages and drive around in a jet or whatever they do, but to do what we want. And if they don't do what we want, which they have proven right now by not standing behind our people, by not freeing the hostages, by not protecting us on our own soil, they have to answer. And if he's unwilling to answer, then he has to resign. This is not an option to drop out of an interview or to hide behind whatever he was hiding behind. He has to answer to us. This is his job. And good journalists are there to ask the critical questions. And I'm happy that we have journalists like that. And this is my the rest of my minute, if anything is left of it, I want to use to actually address not politicians, because I know we love to look at politicians and say they're the problem, blame them for this, blame them for that, which is okay. The blaming and shaming is important too. But our politicians don't come out from space or from Mars. They are out of our communities. They're out from our schools. They are from our parents, from our generation. So if we are unsatisfied with whatever is going on in Europe, if we're unsatisfied with whatever is going on in the foreign ministries of our countries, we have to take a good look at ourselves and at our communities and how we react. And what I have seen in at least the last 3 years that I've been advocating for my dad, is that 80% of any community around the world does not care. They do not care about anything, any pain to other people. Hence, they did not care 44 years what was going on in Iran or Afghanistan or any other countries, because they think it does not affect them. This is a generational problem. This is a problem of parenting. This is a problem of values. We all say that we have values of freedom and equality and all of this. I think the people of Iran have shown that their values are much, much higher than our values over here, because they're willing to risk their lives for it. But what do? My dad is from a generation when the prices went up by 10 cents, they would all go to the streets and do demonstrations. Now we're standing here, we're watching young schoolgirls being poisoned. We're watching European citizens being targeted. We're watching terrorists coming into our country and being involved in the UN, whatever apparatus they have. And there is no outcry. There is no nothing we have to do all of the work to wake them up. So if we don't see our politicians being angry, it is because we are not angry. It's because we looked away. And this is our problem, because freedom is not free. We can see that in these countries, and we have forgotten that. So any freedom that we think we have right here will be taken away, because as Matt and Kasra just said, the IRGC is not just there to uphold the values of the Islamic regime, they're also exporting it. That is part of their task that they're doing. So this that you see in Iran right now, no freedom of expression, no freedom of anything, will be brought to you. They are already in our NGOs, they are in our press, they are in our communities, they're in our teachers, they're in our politicians, they are everywhere. They're getting their ways into our lives over here. And if we don't stand up as the people, not the politicians, and make our politicians do what we need to do, our politicians will not do it, and they will continue the convenient way of losing human lives for dollar signs or whatever else they think is important. So this is my outcry to the people of the world, the families, the normal citizens like me who are not political. We need to stand together. We need to stand up. The revolution in Iran is not just an Iran revolution. It is a revolution of free human beings against tyrants all over the world. So I hope everybody joins us in this.
Thank you very much. I got two raised hands. One is Yossi. I don't know if we can have a very, very brief, although that was a very nice final resume.
I will be very brief. Just a remark regarding this case of the Belgium hostage and the exchange. As far as I know, the Constitutional Court in Belgium, which agreed to this exchange, put the possibility for the Iranian opposition outside Iran to oppose this exchange, which is quite which the Belgian authorities are fearing, you know.
Okay, thanks for that information. We have one more hand, which I see, which is
just a comment. I think they opposed it already. The opposition opposed it, and it went to court, and the appeal was denied.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we still need to work on that end.
So one more. I don't know who's behind iPhone 8. There she is.
Yeah. Hello. I had just a follow-up question. It is me who asked about the nuclear negotiations with Iran, and if it is, which I think that it is the elephant in the room. And my question is actually is that does any negotiations has any value doing with such regime, because they have shown that it is not a body. They can sign an agreement and do whatever they want. It is what I meant, that do we want to do the same mistake with IRGC, which is much more dangerous than, as we have done with Putin? Doing agreement, signing any agreement, it does not have any value with such regime, because they can do whatever they want, even if they sign an agreement, and they will deny it.
Thank you.
So why we are putting such value of being able to talk with them?
Let me maybe put that question to Kasra, if you're available to answer.
Sure.
If you want
What I would say is I'm looking at, I've been reading Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, and it's a very, very useful book if you haven't read it. And she writes, and this is in the 1950s, about totalitarian regimes: contrary to all expectations, important concessions and greatly heightened international prestige did not help to reintegrate the totalitarian countries or induce them to abandoning their lying complaint that the whole world had suddenly lined up against them. I think that's applicable to the Islamic Republic based on experience. The JCPOA failed. The theory behind it, the thinking behind it, by the way, it was done in good faith from the West side. It was done in good faith by the US. It was done in good faith by the Europeans. There was a genuine belief that if you bring Iran, if you bring the Islamic Republic into the fold, it would, and ease sanctions, it would moderate its behavior. The opposite turned out to be true. We saw that as sanctions were eased on the Islamic Republic, there was an increase in the number of IRGC manufactured militias across the Middle East. The militias increased. The IRGC's footprint across the Middle East increased, and we saw an escalation, a surge in the number of IRGC activities in European soil. And what happened, the problem was we didn't check the militancy. The Khamenei has two arms to his foreign policy, diplomacy and militancy. The Europeans, the West, only engaged with one arm. That meant the other arm was unchecked, and it could do what it wanted. Each time the Islamic Republic stepped out of line and the Europeans or the West went to impose consequences, they would threaten to walk away from the deal. So they used the deal as a bargaining chip over the West. I think what Arendt says is applicable to the totalitarian regime of the Islamic Republic. I think the focus should be on empowering the people and weakening the regime. Let's for a second, it's been quite negative, this conversation, because it's quite a negative topic, but let's just imagine the prospect of an Iran free of the Islamic Republic and the impact that could have on everything. I think the brave Iranian protesters, the young Iranians, have taken to the streets despite being cut off from the world for 44 years. They uphold liberal values, as Gazelle said, much more than we do. They want a free society. They want to be part of the world. That gives me long-term hope. The Iranian youth give me long-term hope that the Islamic Republic will collapse and we will have a future with Iran integrated in the world, and that will be the single most important event in modern times. It would have such a liberating effect, not only on Iran, not only on the Middle East, but for world peace.
I totally agree. I think that Iranian youth, are saving the world, because the only way we can prevent this regime from going all the way to nuclear weapon is through our youth in Iran, fighting for freedom, because they are going to do that. All people growing up in Iran, they know that it is their wet dream to be able to threaten the world. Signing any agreement, it is not going to limit them. They are going to do that, and the only way to stop them is to stop them for good. Help people to stop them.
On that positive note, thank you very much. I would like to conclude this meeting. There's a lot to be digested. I think we learned a lot as well. I can say one thing on behalf of EU Watch. We're going to continue to stay on the ball with this subject and with other subjects. There are a lot of other subjects as well that are of relevance here in Brussels to the European Union. Thank you to Matthew Levitt from Washington, to Kasra from London, and to Gazelle from California at 7 a.m. Thanks for making this possible, for being here, and good luck to your father, obviously. Thanks everyone for joining us, and goodbye. Have a nice day. Thanks.